Brothers, stop everything right now. What just happened a few hours ago in the Vatican press room will make your spiritual world crumble. Pope Leo XIV has just uttered the most dangerous words ever spoken by a pontiff in 2,000 years of Christianity. He announced that he is willing to resign, but it is not an ordinary resignation. It is something that has never, ever been considered in the history of the Church. Prepare your hearts, because what will be revealed will change everything you know about the papacy. A journalist asked the forbidden question, the one that for 20 centuries no one dared to ask. And the Holy Father's answer completely paralyzed the Vatican. Cardinals were petrified. The press room went into total shock. The entire Christian world is in convulsion at this very moment. What you're about to see is a precise account of how Pope Leo XIV has just shaken the millennial foundations of the Catholic Church. Pay attention, because what he said after the question is even more shocking than the question itself. His words reverberated like divine thunder through the Vatican corridors. Orthodox, Protestants, and Catholics worldwide are on alert. No one knows for sure if this is the beginning of a historic reformation or an unprecedented crisis. But one thing is certain, nothing will be the same after this day. Dear faithful friend, join our community by clicking the red subscribe button below on your phone or computer. Leave a comment telling us which city you're watching this video from and your name, so we can pray for you together. There are moments in ecclesiastical history when the air seems heavier than a human being can breathe, when silence is not the absence of sound, but a living presence occupying every corner of a room. Such was the atmosphere that morning in the Vatican press room, a space where hundreds of journalists waited without daring to move even a hand, as if the simple gesture of raising a pen could alter the fragile balance of what was about to occur. The white lights, fixed and almost motionless, illuminated tense faces, dilated pupils, clasped hands, open notebooks without a single word written. It was no ordinary conference, no routine message, nor an expected speech. It was uncharted territory, one that no one had ever entered before. A threshold that for 20 centuries had remained untouched by fear, tradition, and prudence. For 2 millennia, no journalist, no theologian, not even a bishop had dared to publicly formulate the question that today hovered, dense and fearsome, over everyone's heads. It was not a declared taboo, but rather an unwritten law, invisible and ironclad like the iron supporting the Vatican columns. It was known that there were boundaries that should not be crossed, questions that should not be asked, terrains in which not even the bravest of men should leave a trace. However, among all those present, a young Greek journalist, still without a trace of professional fatigue, decided to break through that silent wall that generations had respected as dogma. His mere presence, with a folded sheet of paper in his hand and a firm gaze, already hinted that something irreversible was about to happen. And then, amidst this almost sacred tension, he appeared. Leo XIV entered without haste or solemnity, as one who knows he needs to demonstrate nothing for the world to bow before his moral authority. He walked toward the dais with the calm of someone who had conversed with God in the silence of the early morning. His hands rested serenely on the table. His gaze swept across the rows without harshness, yet with the clarity of one who sees beyond human gestures. And then the most disconcerting thing for everyone happened. He smiled. A slight smile, almost imperceptible, yet deep enough to leave each person present with the feeling that something immense, perhaps dangerous, perhaps luminous, was about to reveal itself. There was no trace of unease on his face. There was no defense, no precaution, no tension. Only a strange tranquility, which far from calming the room, made it even thicker, more burdened, more unsettling. Those present did not understand the source of this serenity. But they sensed that the answer they would soon hear would not leave the world the same as before, because there are truths that remain unspoken without causing history to tremble. And that morning was destined to become a luminous crack in the long night of the centuries. To understand why that question, posed in the press room, had the weight of a spiritual earthquake, we must go back a long way to the very first beats of the church, when there were no cathedrals, no ecumenical councils, no power structures, but only small, scattered communities striving to remain united amidst persecution, uncertainty, and nascent heresies. In this early context, the figure of Peter emerged, not yet as a spiritual monarch, but as a point of reference, as a rock in turbulent times. Over the centuries, the living memory of that apostle, his leadership, his martyrdom in Rome, his tomb under the Vatican hill, transformed into what tradition would later call primatus, the primacy of the Roman bishop over all Christendom. Primacy did not arise from an instantaneous decree, but from a slow and complex historical process, woven through wars, councils, and theological disputes. The Catholic Church, as we know it today, maintains that this primacy is not only honorary, but also jurisdictional, real, universal, and direct power conferred by Christ on Peter and transmitted to his successors. This statement was solemnly defined during the First Vatican Council, when the world was undergoing profound political change and the Church sought to reaffirm its identity in the face of the forcefully emerging modernity. There, it was proclaimed that the Pope possesses supreme authority and that his teaching, under specific conditions, is infallible. With this gesture, the Church anchored its structure on a juridical and theological rock that seemed impossible to move. However, not all branches of Christianity shared this view. The Orthodox Church, heir to the ancient Eastern patriarchates, recognizes Rome as the first see, but only as primus inter pares, first among equals. For them, the Roman bishop held a place of honor, but never jurisdictional power over other patriarchates. The Protestant Reformation, born in the 16th century in an explosive context, rejected not only papal authority, but the very idea of an institutional mediator between Christ and the believer. For Protestants, the only supreme authority is Scripture, not a man, no matter how high his position. Between these three visions stretched for centuries an abyss that no ecumenical dialogue could fully close. And it is precisely this abyss that reappeared in a new light when a young journalist dared to ask the unthinkable, whether the Pope would renounce the primacy for Christian unity. The question was not merely personal, nor even pastoral, but a direct missile aimed at the heart of the ecclesial architecture. Because if a Pope were to publicly state that he is willing to relinquish the supremacy of his office, the entire pyramidal structure of the Church would have to be rethought from its foundations. It would no longer be a matter of minor disciplinary adjustments, but of rewriting 2 millennia of doctrinal evolution. The first impact would be hierarchical. Without jurisdictional primacy, the Pope would cease to be the undisputed head of the universal Church, and the ecclesial organization would become a communion of local churches with greater autonomy. The second impact would be doctrinal. If the nature of the primacy were questioned, it would inevitably open the door to reconsidering papal infallibility, defined precisely on the basis of this supreme authority. A third impact would be ecumenical. Relations with Orthodox and Protestants would enter unexpected territory, perhaps promising, perhaps chaotic, as there would no longer be a clear center around which the Christian structure revolved. However, the most profound effect would be spiritual, because millions of Catholics worldwide grew up understanding the Pope as the ultimate guarantor of unity and truth. A change in this role would not simply be a transition of power, but a redefinition of the visible face of the Church. To ask whether the Pope would be willing to renounce the primacy was, in other words, to ask whether the Church was willing to dismantle its own backbone. Therefore, that question was not a simple journalistic provocation. It was, and continues to be, the most dangerous question that can be asked in Christianity. A question that, when uttered aloud, became a genuine theological bomb, whose echo would resonate far beyond the Vatican walls, reaching the consciences of believers, pastors, theologians, and leaders throughout the world. Because whoever touches upon primacy does not touch upon one doctrine among many, but upon the vital nerve upon which the Church has organized its identity for 20 centuries. And that morning, for the first time, the bomb was activated. To understand the magnitude of the moment about to be written in the annals of Christianity, we must return to that minute, suspended in time, when a young Greek journalist decided to stand up. It was neither a sudden nor a heroic movement. It was almost timid, yet full of a determination that even he himself did not seem to fully recognize. His hands, gripping a notebook filled with notes in ancient and modern Greek, trembled only slightly. His eyes were fixed on the pontiff, not with defiance, but with the weight of someone who understands that a single phrase can change the course of the spiritual history of millions of people. The atmosphere in the press room transformed in an instant. Until that moment, everything had proceeded according to Vatican routine, predictable questions, protocols polished by decades of caution, measured answers. But when this young man stood up, the atmosphere tensed like a harp string about to break. Some journalists discreetly put down their pens, as if they understood that nothing they had planned to write down would serve to describe what was to come. The air thickened. Fixed lights seemed to freeze invisible particles floating motionless between rows. And for a moment, no one breathed too deeply for fear of breaking the unsettling spell that had formed. The young man adjusted his jacket, swallowed hard, and took a step forward. He didn't ask for the floor. He took it because the spirit of the moment compelled him to do so. His Greek origins, the son of a Christian tradition that had lived for centuries in parallel, sometimes in tension with Rome, endowed his presence with unintentional symbolism. It represented both the memory of Eastern Christianity, never fully accepting Roman primacy, and the contemporary voice of a generation daring to ask what their elders dared not pronounce. Behind the pontiff, several cardinals exchanged alarmed glances. No one needed to explain anything. Everyone had understood, as if a silent lightning bolt had crossed the room, that this intervention was about to open a rift in extremely dangerous territory. The Cardinal of Warsaw pressed his lips together tightly. The Cardinal of Manila lowered his gaze to the ground, as if seeking inner refuge. The African cardinal, known for his serenity, remained motionless, though his eyes revealed a mixture of fear and fascination. Press office staff, seated to the side, exchanged anxious gestures, knowing that any papal misstep could become a weapon for detractors and allies alike. The camera lenses trembled slightly, not from technical movement, but from the nervous hands of those handling the equipment. The image of Leo XIV's serene face, projected on small screens, seemed to contrast radically with the tacit anguish of the room. It was as if the Pope were prepared, as if he had known the question from before the young man formulated it. An impenetrable peace surrounded his figure, yet this same calmness was more unsettling than any nervous gesture. The journalist opened his mouth. Each word seemed to want to escape before being uttered, as if aware of its own danger. Finally, in a firm but restrained voice, he said in clear Spanish, heavily accented with a Hellenic accent, "Your Holiness, If to achieve the unity of all Christians, you had to renounce the primacy of the Pope, would you do it? The phrase fell upon the room like a heavy object, not ricocheting or scattering, but embedding itself in the floor and cracking it. There was no murmur, no immediate reaction. Silence became almost physical. Journalists stopped blinking. Cardinals were petrified. Even the young journalist seemed to realize too late the magnitude of what he had let slip to the world. Those words, spoken slowly, with clarity that left no room for evasive interpretations, pierced the atmosphere like a scalpel cutting with millimeter precision. It was not a political question. It was not a pastoral question. It was a structural, essential, almost anatomical question, because its thread went straight to the heart of the theological and disciplinary edifice that the Church had upheld for 20 centuries. It touched the most sensitive fiber of Catholicism, the authority of Peter's successor. It questioned what had been defended in councils, canonized in documents, preached in homilies, learned in catechisms, and lived as certainty by millions of people. Some felt dizzy, others a stab of unsettling hope, others a dull fear running down their spines, because they knew that, depending on the answer Leo XIV gave, that moment could become the prelude to unprecedented reform or the beginning of an unprecedented ecclesial storm. In that second, before the Pope uttered a single word, it was evident that history had just changed, and yet everything remained in suspense, awaiting an echo of a response that no one imagined they would hear aloud. When the question finished echoing in the air, the room didn't explode, it contracted. The silence was so tense it seemed capable of bending metal, a stillness not of passivity, but of contained force on the verge of bursting. And it was enough to glance towards the row where several cardinals were standing to understand that, at that precise moment, the Vatican had been thrown into terrain for which there was no manual, no protocol, no safety net. The most senior cardinal present, known for his unwavering doctrinal stance, remained as rigid as a statue. His eyes, normally serene, opened only slightly, revealing a mixture of disbelief and alarm. It was not human fear, but a sudden awareness that the Church's most exposed nerve had been touched. His hands, crossed over his lap, tensed enough to leave visible veins beneath his skin. For him, the question was not audacious, it was sacrilegious. Not out of irreverence towards the Pope, but because he dared to question a structure he had defended throughout his life. Beside him, an Asian cardinal, a contemplative, prudent, and profoundly pastoral man, lowered his gaze to the ground. It was not a sign of surrender, but of hasty discernment. He knew, perhaps better than anyone else in that room, that the Church in Asia lived in a delicate tension between interreligious dialogue and doctrinal fidelity. He understood the desire for unity pulsing in the journalist's question, but he also perceived a disciplinary and theological abyss opening up if the Pope gave too bold an answer. His face showed sadness, as if he could already see confusion exploding in vulnerable communities, where primacy was not a legal category, but a symbol of identity amidst persecution. The spokesman for the Vatican press office, seated a few meters behind, felt his carefully professional expression crack for the first time in years. He lived by control, by language, by interpretations, by calibrated statements. But this moment defied all possible calculation. There was no prepared draft, no official line, no certain answer. What had just happened was located outside the zone where diplomacy and communication can repair damage. It was simply territory that no one had foreseen. However, while the room remained frozen, outside the Vatican, the world was burning in real time. Christian communities connected to the live stream reacted with the brutal immediacy typical of the digital age. In several Orthodox monasteries on Mount Athos, monks, following the transmission from an improvised projector, leaned forward with a mixture of surprise and watchful hope. For them, hearing that question from a journalist was not impactful. What was impactful was imagining that the Pope could, even in theory, answer affirmatively. Its thousand-year history with Rome had been marked by a profound rupture on precisely this point. And for the first time, the remote possibility of reforming the primacy, the major obstacle between East and West, seemed to enter the air like an unknown odor. Protestant communities, for their part, perceived the moment as a shake-up. Pastors and theologians, commenting on live broadcasts on digital platforms, approached their cameras with a mixture of surprise and verification. Some seemed to wonder if they had really heard correctly. Others, more audacious, began writing messages celebrating the journalist's courage, seeing in him an echo of the Reformation, questioning precisely that point 5 centuries ago. And among Catholics around the world watching the scene, bewilderment was absolute. Entire families in front of screens experienced profound spiritual vertigo. They were not used to hearing such questions, much less questions directed directly at the successor of Peter. For some, it was a betrayal of stability. For others, an uncomfortable but necessary ray of light. The Vatican, at that moment, was exposed as never before. There was no script, no prepared notes, no safe paths. The Holy See found itself naked before a question that no modern pope had ever faced in public, and everyone in the room, from cardinals to the youngest journalist, understood that what Leo XIV answered would have an echo that not even 10,000 official statements could contain afterwards. Because when one questions primacy, one is not questioning a man, but the very foundation upon which Catholic identity has been built for 2 millennia. And no institution, however divine its mission, can hear something like that without its inner walls trembling. When the question had already pierced the air and settled in the center of the room, like a stone thrown into the lake of history, all eyes turned to the same point, Leo's face. The tension surrounding the dwelling was so dense that it seemed impossible for anything to penetrate it. However, he did, not with words, but with an almost imperceptible gesture. The Pope raised his chin slightly and smiled. It was not a smile of diplomatic courtesy, nor a defense mechanism. It was an inner smile, silent, almost contemplative, as if he had just heard something he had meditated on at length in solitude. His shoulders remained straight but without rigidity. His hands, resting on the table, showed no tremor whatsoever. The radiating serenity did not stem from human confidence, but from the quiet certainty of someone surrendering their will to a purpose greater than themselves. He leaned forward only slightly, a minimal gesture that, nevertheless, immediately caught everyone's attention. He did not avoid the journalist's gaze, nor the accumulated tension among the cardinals, nor the growing anxiety of the communications chiefs. He didn't shy away from anything. It was as if, in that second, he decided to shoulder the entire weight of the question, to accept its risk, its history, and its possible consequences. Then he spoke, his voice needing no raising to be heard in every corner of the room. "I only keep what Peter kept." The phrase fell with unsettling softness, yet its meaning shook the room like silent lightning. It wasn't a direct answer, but neither was it evasive. It was one of those phrases that forces one to stop, to breathe, to think, and precisely for that reason, when the Pope remained silent for a few seconds, time itself seemed to break. It was a special silence, distinct from previous silences. It was neither fear nor doubt. It was the pause of a shepherd knowing that every word spoken before the whole world can open doors or close them for generations. Cardinals looked at each other, unable to interpret whether this phrase reinforced authority or hinted at a rift. Journalists stood motionless, waiting for some addition, some clarification that would allow them to write headlines without risk of error. But Leo XIV was not there to make their task easier. After seconds that seemed to expand like an endless echo, he calmly added, "If we want unity, show me where Peter is." And a true tremor occurred there. His answer did not deny primacy, but neither did it absolutize it. He did not renounce Peter's legacy, but questioned, with the gentleness of a profoundly spiritual man, the way in which history had interpreted that legacy throughout the centuries. It was as if he was saying, "I will keep this role if it is faithful to the spirit of Peter. But if Peter is not where we believe, I am willing to move to where he is." This type of statement is not heard from a head of state. It is typical of a man who, although wielding immense authority, does not cling to it. At that moment, many saw something extraordinary in the papal eyes, inner freedom not usually associated with power. There was in his gaze a radical dispossession, a sincere willingness to lose everything if something greater would emerge from that loss. For a moment seeming suspended outside of time, the world saw in Leo XIV something that the Church had not contemplated for centuries. The Pope did not defend authority as a shield, but upheld it as an instrument in the service of unity, even willing to let it fall if that opened the door to reconciliation. His response had two perfectly intertwined layers. In the first, he forcefully affirmed continuity with Peter. No one could accuse him of relativizing tradition because he had precisely taken Peter's name as his point of reference. However, in the second, deeper, more unsettling layer, it left open the possibility that the Petrine function could express itself in another way if the Holy Spirit so indicated. This openness was revolutionary, extremely dangerous for some, luminous for others. Leo XIV neither yielded nor submitted to human pressures. He was suggesting something far more important, that true authority does not consist in holding onto a throne, but in faithfully discerning the mission that God entrusted to the first apostle. And if that mission required letting go, he was willing. If it required holding on, he was also willing. That phrase was not a simple answer. It was a mirror forcing the Church to look at itself, a whisper reminding us that power is only authentic when one is willing to renounce it for the love of truth. That day, without openly declaring it, Leo XIV hinted that his papacy was not defined by the throne he occupied, but by the inner freedom with which he was willing to relinquish it if Christ so asked. And that, more than any reform or document, was what truly shook the world. To truly understand the depth of what Leo XIV said that morning, we must delve into territory that few dare to explore without fear, the theological root of Peter's primacy. Because when the Pope uttered the phrase, "Show me where Peter is," he was not performing rhetorical flourishes. He was pointing directly to the biblical, historical, and spiritual foundation that has divided Christians for centuries. To understand why his words resonated so powerfully, it is necessary to examine three major interpretations that have shaped Christianity: Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant. Catholic tradition, deeply rooted in the Gospel of Matthew, maintains that Jesus entrusted Peter with sole authority. In Matthew 16, verses 18 and 19, we read, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven." For the Catholic Church, these words are not a poetic symbol or a fleeting honor. They are an explicit institution of a visible and permanent ministry transmitted through the centuries. Rome became the center of Christendom, not because it was richer or more powerful, but because Peter's blood was shed there, and because believers saw in his successor the guarantor of doctrinal unity. Over time, councils and church fathers reinforced this idea, until the First Vatican Council solemnly defined the primacy of jurisdiction and under strict conditions, papal infallibility. For Catholics, Peter is in Rome because Rome is the site of martyrdom and apostolic legacy. However, Orthodox Christianity does not interpret this passage in the same way. For them, Peter is indeed the first of the apostles, but not in a legal or monarchical sense, but as a symbol of unity. His authority is moral, spiritual, never administrative over all churches. Orthodox Christians see in Matthew's text a particular responsibility, but not absolute power. Historically, they point out that in the early centuries, important decisions were made in councils, where all apostolic sees participated as sisters, not as subordinates. The councils of Nicaea and Constantinople established an order of honor among the sees. Rome, Alexandria, Antioch, Constantinople, but without attributing universal governing authority to Rome. For them, Peter is where his faith is lived and preserved. His primacy is a primacy of love, not of jurisdiction. The Protestant Reformation, in contrast, took a radical turn. Martin Luther and the Reformers did not deny Peter's historical role, but they rejected the idea that this role should translate into exclusive or permanent authority for successors. For them, the rock upon which the church is built is not the person of Peter, but his confession of faith. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Keys to the kingdom are words, not ecclesiastical offices. From this perspective, the church does not need a visible human center to remain united because the only head is Christ. Thus, Peter becomes a symbol of fidelity, not a singular office. 3 visions, 3 stories, 3 interpretations shaping 2,000 years of Christianity. How can a single pope speak without contradicting any of them and, at the same time, without renouncing his mission as successor of Peter? Therein lies the spiritual genius of Leo XIV's response. When he said, "I only hold what Peter held," he kept Catholic doctrine intact, did not relativize primacy, did not deny biblical foundation, nor historical continuity. However, by adding "Show me where Peter is," he opened a theological door, not as a political concession, but as an act of Christological honesty. Because if Peter represents unity, fidelity, and witness, then primacy does not exist for itself, but to serve that unity. Leo XIV did not say he would renounce the primacy. He said he would be willing to reconfigure it if that better reflected Peter's original mission. This seemingly simple phrase achieved something unthinkable. It simultaneously engaged with 3 perspectives. To Catholics, he reminded them that authority is not a privilege, but a responsibility. To the Orthodox, he spoke in their own language, conciliar discernment and primacy of honor. To Protestants, he suggested that the center of Christianity is not a throne, but fidelity to Christ. Leo XIV did not break with doctrine. He did not dilute it. He took it back to its apostolic roots, because when a pope sincerely asks where Peter is, he is not doubting. He is reminding the world that Christian authority is not born from human structures, but from the humble act of following Christ. And that is why his words shook the foundations of Christendom, because within them resonated a call to return to the origin, to a place where divisions did not yet exist, and where primacy was not power, but service. When the words of Leo XIV began to circulate throughout the world, they did not travel as mere religious headlines or diplomatic phrases. They spread like wildfire, finding fuel in different landscapes. Some lands were dry, others fertile, others full of old wounds. What had been uttered in the Vatican Hall became, in a matter of minutes, the epicenter of planetary spiritual commotion. It was as if all of Christendom had been holding its breath for centuries. And suddenly, this phrase released an unstoppable current of air. In the more conservative Catholic circles, the reaction was almost one of panic. Not because Leo XIV renounced the primacy, he didn't, but because he had hinted that the essence of that primacy could be interpreted in a less rigid, less legalistic, more charismatic way. For many of them, this nuance was enough to set off alarm bells. In various traditional theological forums, urgent messages were disseminated describing the event as a half-open door towards the erosion of papal authority. In the United States, a group of lay leaders immediately convened a closed meeting. They gathered in a library decorated with images of previous popes and conciliar texts, discussing with concern whether Leo XIV's response represented a danger to the magisterium. For them, every papal word was meant to be a wall, and that day they had heard a window. Meanwhile, in a Greek monastery on Mount Athos, the scene was radically different. Monks following a live broadcast looked at each other as if they were listening to something they had been waiting centuries for. One of them rose slowly and walked towards the rope of the monastery bell. He did not touch it with euphoria, but with profound solemnity, as one who marks a moment, perhaps a historic one. A deep sound echoed through the stone walls, and some monks, without uttering a word, bowed their heads with emotion. They knew that the wound between East and West was ancient, painful, and full of misunderstandings. But they also knew that no pope, since ancient times, had spoken with such openness toward the possibility of reuniting with Peter, beyond the rigid forms of the past. Even so, their joy was cautious. History had taught them that gestures could fade, and that hopes, when not nurtured with prudence, could turn into disillusionment. In the Protestant world, the reaction was almost electric. Some Reformed pastors immediately connected to impromptu live streams to comment on what had happened. For them, the papal phrase sounded like a historic admission, the first visible crack in the structure they had criticized for 500 years. There was no shortage of hasty headlines proclaiming Rome reconsiders primacy. Although the statement wasn't entirely accurate, the perception was enough for many Protestant groups to see this moment as a unique opportunity for theological dialogue on more egalitarian grounds. In Brazil, a Baptist pastor published a video saying that perhaps the time had come to leave centuries of dispute behind, because for the first time the Pope was implicitly inviting a rethinking of Peter's primacy with the eyes of all Christians, not just Rome. The international press, always hungry for stories that disrupt the established order, reacted with lightning speed. Headlines began to multiply, some careful, others exaggerated, others simply sensationalist. While some periodicals spoke of ecumenical openness, others opted for expressions such as Pope willing to renounce primacy or doctrinal earthquake shakes Vatican. In Italy, debate programs invited canon lawyers, historians, and religious leaders to try to decipher the enigma. However, the more they spoke, the more evident it became that no one knew for sure where the papal pronouncements were pointing. On social media, especially on X, the commotion became a global phenomenon. Within minutes, the hashtag #WhereIsPeter became a worldwide trend, fueled by both believers and critics. Some used it to express hope, others to warn about possible doctrinal deviations. There were those who shared profound spiritual reflections, and others who simply repeated the phrase in astonishment. It was a multicolored mosaic of opinions revealing how deeply this issue touched the heart of Christianity. In a small village in Eastern Europe, parishioners of an Orthodox church didn't wait for the conference to end before turning on their cameras. The priest, surrounded by icons and ancient books, began a live broadcast to explain the importance of what had happened. There was no prior preparation, no script, no recording studios, only emotional faces speaking from the conviction that something sacred was in motion. Comments piled up relentlessly. Is this the beginning of unity? What does the papal phrase really mean? How will Constantinople react? The progressive Catholic world, on the other hand, received the news with vibrant enthusiasm. Some theologians saw in Leo XIV's words an opportunity to rethink the mission of the papacy as service, not as a throne. They proposed the possibility of building a model of primacy that preserves unity without crushing diversity. That day, Christianity ceased to be a static structure. It became a living body, reacting with conflicting emotions. It was a moment that some considered dangerous, others luminous, and others simply inevitable. However, everyone, including those unwilling to acknowledge it, understood that the question could no longer be kept in the archives of silence. Because when the world asks where Peter is, no one can pretend not to have heard. While the world debated, celebrated, or feared papal words, within the Vatican a storm of another kind was brewing. Silent outwardly, but fierce within. The morning was not yet over when the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith called an emergency meeting. The doors of the room closed firmly, not to protect secrets, but to prevent the spiritual tension accumulating inside from escaping into the corridors like a disturbing omen. Cardinals and consultants entered with grave faces, some with folders full of conciliar documents, others with improvised notes, others simply with furrowed brows and heavy hearts. No one spoke excessively. It wasn't necessary. Everyone knew that this morning they wouldn't discuss technical issues, but rather the very stability of the theological edifice upon which the Church had rested for 2,000 years. The mayor began the session in a tone attempting to be neutral, but his voice betrayed evident concern. He explained that the media were interpreting papal words in different ways, and that, to avoid confusion, it might be necessary to issue a statement clarifying that the Petrine primacy was irrevocable. Some cardinals agreed fervently. As if the proposal were a lifeline in turbulent waters, then Cardinal Antonelli, one of the strictest guardians of doctrinal orthodoxy, spoke. He rose solemnly and declared that Leo XIV's response had been ambiguous, and that, although theologically defensible, it possessed a nuance of openness that could be interpreted as a weakening of the papacy. He added that it was the duty of the dicastery to protect the clarity of the faith, and that, therefore, it was urgent to publish a doctrinal note correcting or at least qualifying papal words. The reaction was swift. Cardinal de Souza, known for his pastoral approach and ecumenical vision, asked for the floor and calmly refuted the proposal. He stated that the dicastery's mission was not to correct the successor of Peter, but to help God's people understand the message. He recalled that the papal statement did not deny any truth of faith, and that attempting to reinterpret it authoritatively would be perceived by the world as an internal questioning of the Pope. The intervention further divided the room. Some cardinals, uncomfortable, began to murmur. Others discreetly tapped the table with their fingers, a sign of impatience. Two visible groups formed, those fearing that the Pope would open a dangerous doctrinal door, and those seeing in his words an opportunity for profound dialogue with other churches. The atmosphere became tense. There were no shouts, but there was a much more pervasive tension of conflicting convictions. It was then that, unexpectedly, the door opened and Leo XIV entered. He was not expected to attend this meeting, but no one dared question his presence. He walked to the main table with his characteristic serenity and gently asked them to sit down. The cardinals obeyed with a mixture of respect and unease. The prefect of the dicastery, an experienced man, tried to explain the situation and the proposals that had arisen in the session. He spoke at length and carefully, trying to avoid terms that seemed confrontational. When he finished, the atmosphere was suspended in expectant anticipation. Leo XIV took a deep breath and replied in a firm voice. Without raising it, a clear word needs no defense. Those 11 words spread through the room like a slow fire. They were not aggressive, but rather definitive. They did not attack anyone, but they nullified the possibility of any corrective communication. The Pope continued, saying that if the phrase needed explaining, he would do so himself when he deemed it necessary, and not through doctrinal notes sounding like corrections. Eyes met with unease. Some cardinals immediately understood the weight of that statement. The Pope was asserting his authority not harshly, but calmly, making it even more forceful. Others felt that words added uncertainty and feared that this interpretative silence would fuel further global confusion. That day, a fuse was lit, and no one knew whether it would lead to profound reform, internal crisis, or a new horizon of unity. The only certainty was that Leo XIV would not back down an inch in the face of internal pressure, and as always happens in decisive moments of ecclesiastical history, words did not extinguish the fire. They fueled it with an extra spark. When night fell over Rome, the Vatican did not rest. The windows of the Apostolic Palace remained illuminated with a dim, almost ritual, yellow light, as if each lamp had been lit to accompany discernment, unable to wait for dawn. Inside, in a spacious yet austere room, several cardinals gathered again with the Holy Father. This time there were no cameras, no journalists, no prepared notes, only elderly men, weathered by service, confronted with the age-old weight of a question that transcends all walls. What does it truly mean to be Peter today? The room was enveloped in a thick silence. Walls, decorated with portraits of pontiffs from centuries past, seemed to watch over a conversation about to begin. On the central table, a golden lamp illuminated only faces, leaving the rest of the room in semi-darkness. It was a space designed for decisions that should not be made public until they were fully formed. And that night, Leo XIV knew he was obliged to speak with absolute transparency. Cardinals, weary from the day's discussions, took their seats around the Pope. Some still carried in their eyes the doctrinal tension of the previous meeting. Others seemed to seek solace in silent prayer. Leo XIV stood for a few seconds, observing them with a gaze that was not judgmental, but rather piercing. Then he sat down slowly, placed his hands on the table, and began to speak in such a soft tone that everyone had to lean forward slightly to listen. "I did not summon you to defend myself," he said. "I summoned you to discern together what the Spirit is saying to the Church." No one dared to interrupt him. He continued, "If primacy is an honor, I can renounce it without fear. Honors do not sustain faith." Words floated in the air, simple, almost humble, yet their weight fell like a stone upon the hearts of those who listened. Some cardinals lowered their gaze. Others intertwined their hands, uncomfortable. The possibility of a pope publicly stating he could relinquish the primacy, understood only as a ceremonial dignity, was something that not even the most audacious theologians of the 20th century imagined hearing from the lips of a reigning pontiff. Leo XIV did not hesitate. His voice remained firm. "But if primacy is a cross, if it is a burden that Christ placed on Peter's shoulders to keep the Church united, then it is not for me to reject it." The phrase opened up such a profound space for reflection that those present felt a shudder. It was not rhetoric, it was a spiritual confession. The Pope was reminding them that primacy is not a privilege, but a sacrifice. It is not a throne, but a burden. And that the true criterion for discerning role was neither political nor doctrinal, but evangelical. There was a long silence. Not a single cardinal moved. Everyone understood that they were listening not to a man defending his office, but to a pastor examining his conscience before privileged witnesses. Then came a phrase that broke the night. The problem is not my authority, but Peter's position. Words seemed to pierce through walls, as if wanting to escape into history. They were theological declarations of extraordinary audacity. They did not question the institution of primacy. They did not weaken it. They elevated it to the deepest level. Where is Peter today? What does it mean to be a successor in a fragmented world? How does one exercise leadership when born of martyrdom, not of power? The elderly cardinal with a broken voice murmured, "Your Holiness, this changes everything." But Leo XIV gently shook his head. "It changes nothing of the doctrine. It only changes our hearts if we allow it." The hall fell silent again. No one knew what to answer. Some cardinals closed their eyes, others took deep breaths, others pressed rosaries between their fingers. It was a moment when teaching was united with human vulnerability. When the future of the papacy seemed to rest not on politics, but on prayer, finally the Pope rose. A shadow fell on the wall, imposing and at the same time weary. "I ask you to pray, not for me, but for the Church, because if Peter must move, it is Christ who will move." And with those words he left the room. No cardinal spoke for several minutes. It was as if a flickering yellow lamp were witnessing a mystery yet to be revealed. That night left an open wound, but also hope. Because when the Pope dares to look directly at the cross of Peter, the Spirit begins to whisper things that the Church had gone too long without hearing. There are moments in history when words spoken by a single man resonate beyond his time, as if opening a luminous crack in the accumulated darkness of centuries. Not because this man is powerful, but because he dares to gaze upon truth without fear. And this is one of those rare occasions. We contemplate the Pope not by measuring himself by the strength of the authority he exercises, but by the inner freedom with which he is willing to relinquish it if God so asks. In a world loving crowns, guarantees, and titles, Leo XIV recalled something the Church has known since its origin, but which the weight of history has sometimes made difficult to see: that Peter was not first because he bore an insignia, but because he carried the cross. And that anyone who considers himself a successor must learn to distinguish between honor and mission, between throne and service, between dignity and sacrifice. The papal phrase still resonates as an echo impossible to ignore. The problem is not my authority, but Peter's position. These are words that compel believers of all denominations to pause, because this statement is neither a political challenge nor a diplomatic strategy. It is a return to the gospel. To that question, Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do you say I am?" Before discussing structures, before building walls or tending bridges, unity begins there, in recognizing who Christ is for each of us and what it means to follow him wherever he calls us. Throughout this history, we have seen diverse reactions: enthusiasm, fear, hope, suspicion. Each reveals not only the complexity of world Christianity, but also the depth of the wound of division. And yet, Leo XIV's response had an unexpected quality. He did not promise radical changes, he did not renounce primacy, he did not dictate new norms. He did something more difficult. He opened up inner space, a place where every Christian, Catholic, Orthodox or Protestant can sincerely ask themselves where Peter is today and where his Spirit calls him. Perhaps unity will not be born from agreements made in offices or from institutional reforms. Perhaps it will begin in the silent humility of recognizing that no one possesses Christ, that no one can contain truth in a single temple. We are all pilgrims, trying to follow a voice without belonging to any human group. And perhaps, just perhaps, this papal gesture, this gesture of freedom, of availability, of possible renunciation, is the seed of something that only God can make grow. The Church is not a fortress made of stone, but a living body breathing, suffering, learning, and like every living organism, it needs moments of deep examination. This was one of them. And although we don't yet know what fruits it will bear, we know that it has brought back to millions of people an essential question. What does it truly mean to be one? Not forced uniformity, not the victory of some over others, but unity springing from love, truth, and the cross. As the Vatican lights went out that night and the streets of Rome fell silent, a strange feeling began to spread among those who had followed this story. It was not fear nor certainty. It was something gentler, more humble, an invitation, a call to listen more deeply, to look beyond structures, to seek in the face of the other a spark of the same Christ. And so, this account doesn't end with an announcement or a definitive conclusion. It ends with an open space, like a chapel without doors, where each believer can enter to pray, to reflect, to ask God what paths of unity still need to be followed, because the question marking this day didn't end in the press room. Now it rests in the heart of each one of us. May the peace of Christ illuminate your steps as we continue our journey toward the place where Peter, in the deepest truth, always pointed toward him. The following days witnessed seismic shifts in world Christianity. Orthodox communities initiated unprecedented dialogues with Catholic representatives. Protestants gathered in theological conferences, exploring possibilities unimaginable weeks before. Within the Vatican, special commissions were discreetly formed to study historical models of Petrine primacy. Theologians from three traditions began collaborating on joint documents. Something was stirring in the depths of Christendom, something that no press conference could contain, nor any official statement explain. Young people of all denominations began to meet in ecumenical prayer groups, not waiting for official permission, simply responding to an inner calling. Orthodox priests visited Catholic parishes. Protestant pastors dialogued with Roman bishops. Millennial fishers began timidly to show the first glimmers of possible healing. Meanwhile, Leo XIV remained in prayerful silence. He gave no interviews, clarified no positions, and issued no documents. He simply prayed. And in that silence, paradoxically, his voice became clearer, because he had uttered not a papal decree, but an evangelical question. And true questions do not need immediate answers, but hearts willing to listen to them. In a small Greek village, an Orthodox priest and a Catholic parish priest celebrated together, for the first time in 1,000 years, a prayer for unity. It was not an official event, nor was it covered by the media. It simply happened, like grass sprouting between stones. And when elders from both communities embraced with tears, something of the kingdom of God became visible. At a Protestant seminary in Germany, a professor began a course on Petrine ministry in United Christianity. Students, children of the Reformation, studied Catholic and Orthodox texts with open minds, seeking not to win debates, but to understand their brothers and sisters. A silent transformation was taking place in young hearts, not yet hardened by old doctrinal battles. The Catholic Church itself was experiencing internal turmoil. Conservative groups organized petitions demanding doctrinal clarification. Progressives celebrated unprecedented openness. Moderates attempted to build bridges between extremes. However, everyone, even the most critical, had to admit, never in modern history had a pope generated so much dialogue as Leo XIV with a simple question. Critics accused him of dangerous ambiguity. Defenders praised his prophetic courage. Historians compared the moment to great councils of the past. Theologians debated the implications for hours in pontifical universities. Yet the Pope remained serene, like an ancient tree withstanding a storm, rooted not in human opinions, but in prayer. Months later, in a private meeting with close cardinals, Leo XIV finally shared something from his heart. "I don't know if I will see Christian unity in my lifetime, but I know that God has asked me to plant a seed. If it germinates, it will be His work, not mine. If it dies, it was the wrong seed at the wrong time, but not planting out of fear would be disobedience." Words fell upon cardinals like gentle rain upon parched earth. Some finally understood. They were not facing a political strategist or a reckless reformer, but a shepherd willing to risk everything for the lost sheep. And the lost sheep, in this case, was the unity of Christ's flock, fragmented for centuries. Ancient Rome, witness to empires and papacies, now contemplated an unprecedented scene, a pontiff not asserting power, but questioning it, not building walls, but opening doors, not proclaiming certainties, but asking questions. And in this seemingly fragile gesture, a different kind of strength was revealed. The strength not of one who conquers, but of one who serves, not of one who dominates, but of one who loves. History will judge whether Leo XIV was visionary or reckless, prophet or disruptive. But no one can deny that he brought back to Christianity an essential question forgotten under centuries of institutional disputes. Where is Peter? Not in what chair he sits, not what title he holds, but where is his heart, his witness, his martyrdom for love of Christ and the unity of his body? And while the world continued reacting, debating, waiting, Leo XIV withdrew one night to his private chapel. He knelt before the crucifix, the very one before which he had prayed before the fateful conference, and began to pray in a choked voice that only ancient walls could hear. "Lord Jesus Christ, you who prayed that all may be one, as you and the Father are one. Hear the prayer of an unworthy servant. I do not know if I did right or wrong in answering as I did. I do not know if I opened the door to unity or to confusion. But I know, Lord, that I could not remain silent when they asked me about Peter, because Peter does not belong to me. Peter belongs to you. And if I must release him so that he may return to you in a purer, more evangelical way, more faithful to what you truly entrusted to him, then so be it. I do not cling to a throne. Lord, I cling only to you. Forgive me if I have caused scandal to the little ones. Forgive me if I have confused the simple of heart. But do not allow love of peace to make me an accomplice to the division that tears your body apart. It pains me to see Christians divided, Lord. It pains me to see Orthodox, Catholics and Protestants looking at each other with suspicion instead of love. It pains me that the name of Peter, the rock upon which you wish to build unity, has become a stumbling block dividing brothers. If it is necessary that I be that stumbling block so that others may find the true path, I accept it. If it is necessary that I lose everything so that your church may gain unity, I accept it. Because I did not come into the world to be pope. I came to be a Christian. And to be a Christian means to follow you, no matter the cost. Bless all who have heard my words, those who understood and those who did not, those who celebrated and those who feared, the hopeful Orthodox and the frightened Catholics, the curious Protestants and the observing agnostics. May all see in me not a man defending power, but a servant seeking truth. May all understand that the question, "Where is Peter?" is not a renunciation of Peter, but a search for the authentic Peter, the Peter of the gospel, the Peter who denied you 3 times and loved you 3 times. The Peter who died upside down because he was not worthy to die as you did. This Peter, Lord, this is the one I want to follow. Not the Peter of palaces and crowns, but the Peter of fishing boats and torn nets. Help me, Christ, to be a servant of your unity, not a master of your division. Help me to distinguish between primacy that serves and primacy that dominates. And if the day comes when I must choose between my position and your gospel, give me the courage to always choose you, because when everything is over, when history judges, when the dust settles, only one question will matter. Was I faithful to you? May the answer be yes, Lord. Even if the world says no, amen.